Byron and I are often so in sync that I know that telepathically he just told me that any unclaimed eggs he has volunteered to match financially any eggs that are found. No, I'm kidding. But yeah, at any rate, good morning, Cornerstone. It is great to be with you. I was telling somebody this week. I just want to lift up the Word family for a second here. I was telling somebody just about how generous they are. Byron led the teen class this past Wednesday, and it's set a high bar for anybody that's going to come in and do the teen class. And I know he didn't ask me to do this. He wouldn't want me to do this. But part of the activities he was doing with the teens in the lesson, he had 4 $25 gift cards. That he was giving out to teens. And it's like, it's one thing to, a $5 Chick-fil-A gift card. And I don't mean that, you know what I mean? I mean, there's 50, that was, we definitely put some money towards that. But to say, I'm just gonna, as a part of my lesson, I want to encourage the teens. I want them to have a great time. And, but that's just a small example of how generous the Word, every time it's somebody, if your kid is selling Girl Scout cookies or you're trying to go to Taiwan, he's always like, okay, hey, I just want to give something. And that's just how generous they are as a family. So I really, really appreciate the Word family so much. We are continuing with our theme of harmony. And, just this idea of it is important to have balance. It is important to have balance in your spiritual life. It is important to have balance in your physical life, in your diet. If you've got some questions about how to eat better, see Moses and Mamta. They can tell you all about, the plant-based diet and ways to be more healthy. And, but it is important to have balance. It is important to have harmony in your life. And that's one of the things this year as a church we want to have. We want to have harmony, right? It is important to get 6 to 8 hours sleep. Now, I know that, the Kellys over there with Jet, that's probably not happening a lot, right now. And I know that the Von Wiegans with Kyla and Kalani, they're trying their best to get that, but it is important to have balance, even in terms of how much we sleep, eat, so on and so forth. And so this year, we hope that you'll be thinking about your life in those terms. Right? Is my life balanced spiritually, emotionally, physically, etc.? This week had a couple of holidays. Today, since I'm up here, I get to shout it out. Today is March the 10th, or for all the gamers out there, it is March 10th at MAR. And then Happy Mario Day for all of the gamers out there. Yeah, Happy Mario Day. Also on Friday was International Women's Day, and so appropriate to celebrate that, particularly as we just studied out the role of women in the church. And so just thinking about a lot of different things. I was listening or reviewing over my sermon from last week, and I started off talking about how I love the game Scrabble. And in Scrabble, there are certain letters that have different values. And as I was a young person, I didn't see the value of the Q, of the Z, of the X. But after I learned a little bit more about Scrabble strategy, I realized those are, if you have those and you use them right, you can win a lot more easily. But I tried to make the point that, if God is sort of playing Scrabble, instead of wanting to be a J or a Q or an X, I think the piece that God would want us to say, this is what I want to be, is the blank piece. For God to be able to say, if I need to use you as a W, I can use you as a W. If I need to use you as a K, I can use you as a K. If I need to use you as that U, right, just to help somebody else's Q, then that's the heart I should have. God, here I am, send me. And that can really lead us to have harmony in our lives if we have that attitude. If we're trying to force ourselves into, I need to be a Z, a 10-point letter, we can get very much out of balance. And one of the things I talked about was playing Scrabble with Natasha, and we play online, and I was talking about how Natasha often wins using words that aren't even words, and some people, kind of wondered, well, maybe it's a skill issue, Fenton. Maybe it's just a skill issue for you. So I wanted to just kind of pull up the board from last week and just give some examples. So, the game started off, Natasha was going first, and the first word that she used was pangas. Now, raise your hand If you know what a panga is, Natasha included, raise your hand if you know what a panga is. You know? What's a panga, Shannon? It's a type of animal? Nope. It is a skiff. It is a type of fishing boat, right? It's a type of fishing boat, you know? And so, you know, right on to that word, you know, I'm using words that are real words, and I use the word skirt, you know, that's a real word, right? And so I used it, and what she added on to skirt was the word Curie. Now, again, you're not supposed to be able to use proper nouns, right? Like Marie Curie, that's one thing. You know, anybody here know what a Curie is? Well, it's a unit of any radioactive nuclide in which 3.7 times 10 to the 10th disintegrations occur per second, right? And you know, honey, I know you knew that. I didn't know that, but you knew that, I'm sure. And so, I add on another word that's a real word, colon, and then Natasha adds the word Vang, V-A-N-G, right? Because, she's, just common words that we all use in our everyday speech. Apparently, she's a sailing aficionado because this is the either of two ropes extending from, the gaff to steady it when the sail is not set. And I know she knew that because, And, some people might say, Fenton, you're just a sore loser. You're just being prideful. Appropriately, my next word was pride. Appropriately, my next word was pride. But again, real word that we all know what it means. And if anybody wants an update, she is winning 342 to 265 with 9 tiles left. I'm not going to win this game. I'm just not going to win. Amen. But the funny thing about it is, now, we're both pretty competitive, but, I'm the language guy, the linguist. Like, I really care about words and their meaning and using them appropriately and, knowing what words mean. When I play in Scrabble or in Portuguese and if I use a word I don't know, I tend to go look it up afterwards so I can know what it means, right? And so part of this, it just feels almost like an injustice. That I care so much, and I'm still gonna lose. You know what I mean? But it's interesting because sometimes it can just feel like life works out that way, right? Where I'm a more of a college football fan, but yet I've been to 3 Super Bowls. How does that work out? There's somebody in here it's their bucket list. They want to go to a Super Bowl, and the people have been dying. And this guy he's not even into the NFL, and I've been able to go to 3. Right? Or somebody, wins tickets to a concert for a band, they call on the radio, they don't even care. Right? Like, we see that happen in life sometimes, right? And we feel like that's just not fair, right? Life is sometimes not just fair. And I'd like to put before you that, the simple truth is life isn't fair. But God is fair. Life is not fair, but God is fair. And I will put before you that knowing that and saying that up here from the stage and being somebody in the ministry, I spend a lot of time all week thinking about God and thinking about his characteristics, who he is. And even though I can say that, it sounds like a good line for Fenton to use. Life is not fair, but God is. Even I can sometimes struggle with, man, is God fair? Look over in Ecclesiastes chapter 7. And it's really interesting. The Bible Project, they did a series on the wisdom literature. And the wisdom literature is basically the books of Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, and Job. And you could throw Song of Solomon in there as well. But they're wisdom literature. And they sort of lay it out that the point when you look at Proverbs sort of worldview is that if you do good things, good stuff's going to happen to you. Right? If you sort of obey some pretty good principles and you follow the laws, you follow the rules, if you try to just be a good person, well, good will come to you. And if you're bad, if you're evil, if you don't, then bad stuff should happen to you. And there's a part of us that says, you know what, that seems to generally be true about life. But then you see that life doesn't always just work out like that. And Ecclesiastes kind of comes afterwards and says, I hear your Proverbs, but time and chance happen to everybody. Just time, like the passage of time, like we all just grow older and things happen, and then chance, random things just sometimes happen. right? And so even once you think you've gotten that sort of figured out, Job comes along and says, yes, that's also true. But ultimately, trying to just figure it all out and do your calculations and work it all out, at the end of the day, you just need to fear God because he's working with complex systems and complex things. I mean, think about some of the questions that he asks, right? Job, you were there, right? You can tell the water where to stop, right? You were there when I put the sun and the moon. You know. And so God is basically saying, look at the Leviathan, right? Look at these creatures. They would kill you because they're animals, right? And I think, there's a lot of ideas that he's referring to a whale there or something like that. But, if you go out in the wild, right, a lion's not evil. If a lion gets you, it's just that's in its nature, right? It's going to try to eat. And so God was saying to Job, there's a lot of complex systems going on, right? And even if I tried to explain it all to you, you wouldn't quite get it. Right? So just trust me. Know that I love you. Know that I am for you. Right? But I wanted to dive in a little bit to that posture that Ecclesiastes have, because this verse is one of the ones that, again, I wrestled with this week, and I'm going to tell you a little bit why, as I was thinking about just the fairness of life and the fairness of God and how I can have harmony in understanding that. Ecclesiastes 7 and verse 15 says, in my futile life, I have seen everything. Someone who really cares about Scrabble still lose. Right? Yes, right? Right, no, I'm kidding. But I've seen everything. Someone righteous perishes in spite of his righteousness. And someone wicked lives long in spite of his evil. I'm going to pause there for a moment because I just was wrestling a lot with this week. I had unfortunate situation. A good friend of my sister and a childhood friend of ours, 41 years old, 2 kids, a 9-year-old, a 3-year-old, passed away of breast cancer. And it's one thing when you go to a funeral and you really feel like this is a celebration of life and they got to sort of live their life, and whatever number it is you put on that's enough, and you feel like, okay, we can be okay, right? It doesn't feel that way about a 41-year-old ever, right? And she was a good friend of my sister. She was Shannon's RA, so we found out we had that in common. Shannon came to the funeral, and I'm just sitting there, and I just think, man, but Tiffany was such an amazing person. Like, when you listen to all the people share about her and her life, it's like, a few weeks ago, I attended the funeral of my mentor, my high school math teacher, Mr. Stinson, and he was in his 60s, same thing, passed away of cancer. And even then, I still felt like, man, like, that was just too young. Like, he's got young grandkids, and, we've got folks in our church in our 60s, and I couldn't imagine being without them. Like, and it just felt like, man, that's just not right. And again, it's one thing I can get and just understand that, since the fall, since the curse, right, some stuff, time and chance happen, right? And so I can kind of wrap my brain around that idea and sort of be okay. But the part of this verse that really just kind of feels like daggers in my heart is it says, someone wicked lives long in spite of his evil. Because that's the part that I go, God, like, that's not cool. Like, that's not fair. And if we're being honest, I can say, I almost feel that's not right. And that's what I struggle with. It's like, Mr. Stinson and Tiffany, like, we see people like that pass, and then you know whoever you want to think of, but some wicked people that live a long time, that do harm to self, to others, to societies, to nations, to the world even. And it's like, of all the people to get cancer, and like, again, I'm just being honest, all right? I'm just being gut level. Like, there's a part of my heart that goes, why not that person? They deserve it. This person didn't, and I struggle. I struggle to harmonize, to have balance in my own life when I sort of see this happen and play out in real time. But I love what Solomon writes afterwards. He says, don't be excessively righteous and don't be overly wise. Why should you destroy yourself? Don't be excessively wicked and don't be foolish. Why should you die before your time? It is good to grasp the one and do not let the other slip from your hand. For the person who fears God will end up with both of them. Another version says, the man who fears God will avoid all extremes. And I think, I love what Solomon's saying. He's like, I've built a lot of projects, I've done a lot of things, and I've just seen that this is how we want life to be like Proverbs. You do good, good happens. You do bad, bad happens. And it just isn't always the case, right? And Solomon comes back and he's just sort of saying, listen, this can be oppressive. This can be discouraging. This can make you feel downtrodden. But here's the deal. Don't try to look at that and then say, well, I need to be more of X, more. Bottom line, be in balance. Have harmony, right? Don't overindulge. Whatever it is, right? The Bible talks about honey. You eat too much honey, your stomach's going. You don't get a tummy ache, right? Even something that is good to you. God says, man, knowing when to stop. And there's a great Bema podcast about the God who knows when to stop. He's made this masterpiece. He could have done it in one day. He said, I'm gonna do it in 6. He could have kept working. He said, it's time to stop. There's a time when you look at the product and you say, it's time to stop. There's a time when you've got a bowl of candy in front of you, you want some, and there's a time, no, stop. Enough, don't over. And so when I was thinking about this verse, I love, again, looking at the entire book, look at the book in its entirety. I actually feel like part of getting to chapter 7 and understanding that is you really got to go back to chapter 3. And this is a passage that is often read at funerals, but I was really reflective on this more than normal this week as I was thinking about harmony, my life, what it means to live a life of harmony with God. In Ecclesiastes chapter 3, it says, there is an occasion for everything and a time for every activity under heaven, a time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to uproot, a time to kill and a time to heal, a time to tear down and a time to build up, a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to mourn and a time to dance, a time to throw stones and a time to gather stones, a time to embrace and a time to avoid embracing, a time to search and a time to count as lost, a time to keep and a time to throw away, a time to tear and a time to sow, a time to be silent and a time to speak, a time to love and a time to hate, a time for war and a time for peace. What does the worker gain from his struggles? I have seen the task that God has given to the children of Adam to keep them occupied. He has made everything appropriate or everything beautiful in its time. He has also put eternity into their hearts, but no one can discover the work God has done from beginning to end. I know there is nothing better for them than to rejoice and enjoy the good life. It is also the gift of God whenever anyone eats, drinks, and enjoys all his efforts. I know that everything God does will last forever. There is no adding to it or taking from it. God works so that people will be in awe of him. I feel like that's one of those verses in the Bible you kind of should just read regularly. Because as we go through the ups and downs, the altibajos de la vida, the ups and downs of life, I think it is important to know that, bottom line, things are going to be cyclical. There's just going to be some time in your life where things are going good and it feels like stuff is falling into place and exactly what you're praying for, you feel like God is saying yes and my prayers are being answered and I'm happy and my marriage is going well and my kids are doing well, and it's just, man, you're just like, man, you're willing to give out $25 gift cards at Team Midweek, life's just going great, right? And then there's those times when you're fighting with your spouse or roommates or your brothers and sisters, your grades are not good, you're getting bad reviews at work, you're struggling with your weight, or you're struggling with your health, and it just seems like, man, I can't get right. And it feels like everything is just going to hell in a handbasket. And the thing I like to put before you is that, man, bottom line, whichever place you're at, mountaintop or in the valley, God is there. God has not suddenly abandoned you, or God has not suddenly, left you to your own devices, or just he's not with you when you're going through the toughest times. And it's not like you suddenly have just more of God's favor because you got the promotion, you got a raise, that deal worked out, you got the job. Like, it's not. Love what he says here. He says, God has put eternity on the hearts of men. I like to say there's a God-sized hole in your heart that even when you have all that stuff, when it's going great, there's still something you feel it's missing. There's a part of you that still either wants more or you feel like it's not enough, even when you're happy. It's because there's a hole in your heart that is just big. The only one who's big enough to fill it is God. Not projects, not success, not money, not sex, not, financial status, not popularity, not looks, not a certain weight or a certain height, right? Like, God has said, man, I put eternity on their hearts. And I think when we can understand that, it can help us to have more harmony, to have more balance. Man, I need to seek and be pursuing and going after God. Question I want you to think on, he talks about all the different times. What is it a time for in your life right now? What is it a time of in your life right now? There's a time to search. There's a time, you're thinking, man, I'm just not happy in my profession, and I want to get a change of career. And you're sending out resumes. You're talking to people. You're giving contacts. You're going on LinkedIn. You're doing all this stuff, and nothing seems to be coming of it. It says there's a time to search, and there's a time to, God, I guess in this season right now, you want me here. There's a time to count as lost. Right? There's a time to embrace. There's a time, when someone just needs a hug, or maybe you just need a hug. There's a time when, you need to embrace somebody and have them in your life, associate with them, and all those sort of things. And then there's some situations. I love what he says here. There's some situations. It's not that you don't. God does command us to forgive, right? But only he can both forgive and forget. We can't. And so sometimes there's been grievous sin, grievous damage that has been done to you. And you go to that family reunion and no, it is not a time to embrace this person. Right? There's a relationship that we get together, things do not go well for you, me, or anybody, right? There's a time. We need to put some distance. We need a break in this, right? There's a time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing. Think about your relationships. Think about your life. Like, what is it in your life right now that it is a time for in your life? Is it a time to weep? This week, this last couple months, Tiffany, Stinson, it was weep. It was tears, Counterbalance that with last night, one of my childhood friends turned 43, and his girlfriend threw him a surprise party, and we had a chance to go out, and we laughed, and we ate good food, and we had drinks, and we played games, and they were singing karaoke and gave gifts, and it was a time to laugh. Right? But there's a time for both. And so in your life right now, what is maybe God saying to you that it is a time for? There's a time to keep and a time to throw away. Natasha says, Fenton, you're a hoarder. Do you really need, when Chloe graduated, they got all the programs, and I probably got, they had a bunch, right? So, so I'm like, there might be some cousin or somebody that want, so I probably got, 15 or something like that programs, but I wanted to get some from my parents and my sisters. And so the other day we were cleaning up my office and we were going through stuff that we need to file and stuff that we need to just throw away. And so we got to the programs and I'm like, but what if no. And Natasha's like, no. And it was like, it's just, we don't, when are you ever going to go? And I'm probably not going to. Chloe's got her copy. But there's a time to throw away. There's a time to throw away. But what is maybe in your life spiritually that's clutter? What is the clutter? What is I'm just holding on and God is like, I need you to trust me. And God is saying it is time to let go and let God. What is like that in your life that you're holding on to? And God is saying, this might be a time for you to let this go. There's a time to be silent and a time to speak, and that'll preach all day long. Mm-hmm. Right? I tend to be pretty loquacious. Natasha says, you have an opinion on everything. You could ask, if you were to ask me about, nucleides to the 3.7 times 10 to the 10th iterations and, a Curie, I bet I'd have a theory, and I probably do. No, it's not, But there's a time to speak. There's a time when, it's a time for you to speak up and time for you to speak out, right? If there's injustice going on in the world or in your life around you, there's situations, there's people that's got, sometimes you just got to have a conversation that ain't fun to have. Some people, sometimes, I'm looking at somebody who had to have one of those conversations this week. I had to have one this week. Sometimes you just got to speak up and say, man, I don't think you're living in God's will right now, or I don't think that is right for you, or, bro, I see this sin in your character, and there's a time to speak up. And I remember some years ago, Steve, I don't know if you remember this conversation, but I had to just decide I'm not going to be the Facebook police. Because, sometimes I just see disciples on there just posting stupid stuff and inappropriate stuff, sinful stuff, just garbage, right? And I remember having a conversation with people about this, and I just felt like, oh, man, but I feel like I'm the watchman from the book of Ezekiel, and I need to. And I remember Steve being like, Steve being like, you know what? They've got people in your life. They've got people in their life that are probably closer to them than you are. Sometimes you can't be worried about. You just can't be worried about everything that everybody posts. And it was like, I don't even know if you remember that conversation, Steve. He doesn't, but it was a life-changing word for me. It was because sometimes it can just get oppressive, like feeling like, but they're a disciple, and why would they post that? And a time to be silent. I'm sure you remember, let God work. Let God work in their life is ultimately, right? And so there is somebody in that person's life that probably does need to speak up, but it don't need to be me. And with every issue, everything that's going on, every time somebody posts, right? And it doesn't need to be you. I think the Spirit's going to speak again and again, man. This is a time to speak up. A time to love and a time to hate. A time for war and a time for peace. Time to plant and a time to uproot. A time to be born and a time to die. As I was, went to my buddy's birthday party last night and going to these funerals, I was really, one of the things I thought about in both situations, I really, really, not for my glory, but I really just want to have a life that matters and that impacts people. And I want to do the good of God in this world. I was literally thinking, one of the things my teacher did, because I think he found out pretty early on that he was going to pass. It's kind of interesting. It's actually a little funny. He wrote his own service. He wrote his own service. And he said, I want this person to do this. I want this person to do this. And he contacted everybody. And even in the notes of the program, he said, my sister's not going to talk long. He was speaking to everybody. It was so cute. It was so funny, right? But as we were going through, it was so interesting. I knew him as a teacher. But at his funeral, honestly, the people talk most about him as a father, him as a friend, him as a fraternity brother, him as a musician. It's like this whole, what it's like, and I'm sure if you have young kids, or you remember as a kid, you ever see your teacher at the grocery store? Or you're with your kid and they see their teacher and it's like, you live outside of that wall, outside of that classroom, you have other things going on, right? Because their context is just as Mrs. Williams. They know Mrs. Williams in the classroom, and and so they see her at the grocery store. I'm like, oh my gosh, But that it was a little bit that it was a little bit that feeling for me, like the great that he did in my life, and it was so impactful. It was this small little bit. He had all these other things going on. I think he had a life that was balanced. It wasn't just about being an amazing teacher, which he was. It was about being an amazing father, an amazing husband, amazing brother, friend, church member, right? And I think the sort of the same thing, right? We've got to have balance. Can you imagine? Man, I just want to be the best husband in the world, and all I'm going to focus on is being the best husband, right? And can you imagine somebody literally having that perspective and then saying, I just don't even need to really worry about my kids. I just need to focus on that just seems silly to us to even think about, right? We would never say, yeah, that makes sense, or let's do that. How often do we do that with a job, though? And there is not work-life balance. There is not career balance, where it is all about the amount of bricks you can make, right? They're all about the amount of money and your life gets consumed. And I'm not saying we need to be great workers, right? Everything you do in the name of the Lord. But is there harmony? Is there balance in your life? It's interesting, spiritually speaking, as we wrap up here. I want to go to one verse by Jesus, but sometimes you can feel like, people feel like, man, they get some sort of spiritual awakening and they feel like, oh, I need to go and be a monk. I just need to remove myself from society and I need to go live out in a cave and just get away from everything and really, and I was thinking, and at the base level, there's part of that seems like, okay, amen. But when you really look at who God is, and he wants us to have relation with him, relation with others, that's not his design. It's just to go live off and be by yourself. Now, I think you see the spiritual men and women of the Bible, right? The sojourn, right? The go have a journey. Jesus went out to the desert, right? Elijah went out to the mountain. Moses went out and he found the bush, right? There is something, we absolutely need to have these times where it's silence, a time to be silent with just you and God. Right? It's absolutely for that. And when's the last time you had to do that? To just get away, this month of fasting as we're looking for God's will, right? On the role of women in the church, right? There may be a time to just go spend a day out at Stone Mountain, just you by yourself with your Bible and some songs in the Lord or in the woods or at the lake, right? But God's design was never for you to just go out there and stay out there, right? It was always come back and the lessons, the things that you've learned, the harmony that you've gotten with me, I want you to share that with somebody else. There's a time for everything under heaven. In Luke chapter 10, we'll close out here before we get to the questions to reflect on. This is a story we're all familiar with. Mary and Martha. Luke chapter 10 and verse 38, it says, while they were traveling, he entered a village. And a woman named Martha welcomed him into her home. She had a sister named Mary, who also sat at the Lord's feet and was listening to what he said. But Martha was distracted by her many tasks. And she came up and asked, Lord, don't you care that my sister has left me to serve alone? So tell her to give me a hand. Pardon me. The Lord answered her, Martha, Martha, you are worried and upset about many things, but only one thing is necessary. Mary has made the right choice and will not be taken away from her. So I love this because here's the deal. And I think somebody shared about this at one point. Yeah, Greg, and I think even Wendy's comment that night about, what? In her society, Martha was doing what was expected. You got guests coming over and you know what? They need to eat and the house needs to be set right and it's got to be ready. Jesus is coming over and we don't want him looking at the drywall. It's so funny. One quick thing. How many times I come into people's homes and they're like, oh, don't mind, that hole over there or whatever. I didn't even notice it until you pointed it out. So here's the deal. Right? Stop worrying about that sort of thing. That's just a whole nother lesson, right? I'm coming in focused on having a great time with you. I'm not worried about your house, all right? But there, guess what? The dishes did need to be done. The food did need to be served, right? And there is a time for that. And I think we can mostly not have the balance and we get caught up and distracted like Martha. And we say, man, it's always a time for getting X, Y, and Z done, right? And man, how often do we need to say, it is a time to just sit at Jesus' feet. It is a time to just listen to the Lord. It is a time to glean from him. And guess what? The dishes are still going to be there, right? Bills still going to be there. Yes, you need to pay them. But man, I need to spend some time for this in my life. So as we close, I want you to reflect on a couple of questions. I put 3, but you're only going to get really 2 because I didn't get to the third thing. Again, there's a time to speak slower, time to speak faster, time to speak less, time to speak more. What is it a time for in your life right now? Maybe you've been visiting and you know it's time for you to get serious about Jesus, right? Ask the person that you have met or know here to study the Bible with you. Or maybe you've been studying the Bible and it's like, I need to make a decision for Jesus. Maybe it's time for you to make Jesus Lord and get baptized, right? What is it time for you right now in life? Maybe it's a time maybe it is a time to change a job. Maybe it's a time to say, I'm going to be content where I'm planted at right now. And God has put me here and I'm just going to serve the Lord here and impact the people here that he's put me. What is it a time for in your life? to throw stones or to pick them up, to search or to let go, right? Really reflect on what is it a time for in your life right now. Secondly, do you avoid all extremes? If not, how can you overcome this? If not, why not? And how can you overcome this? I'll say this all year long. Can you avoid the extremes of, man, only the Republicans are right. Only the Democrats are right. They both wrong. for a lot of stuff, right? Right? Can you avoid all extremes on that stuff? Right? If you're not a person that can avoid all extremes, ask some folks in your life, pray to, spend some time with God. Why not? Why am I so, right? It's good to be all in, but you can't just be 0 or 100. Right? God literally is saying in Ecclesiastes, it's a time for everything. You gotta be balanced. Right? Last thing I had to get a chance to was, how do you balance being in the world but not of the world? Right? So that's just some thoughts for you today in harmony, some things going on in my life. I hope that encouraged you, inspired you. We're going to have a few announcements from Wendy and one closing song. Thank you so much for your time today. Amen.